Good morning. Welcome to episode 119 of Duval Rundown. This morning, I'm joined by an extremely special guest. He is normally a special guest, but extremely this morning because it is our first ever returning national guest. It's JP Acosta of SB Nation. JP, thanks so much for joining me today to talk Jaguars 2025 NFL Drafts.
Of course. It was a great time coming on last time. And of course, we got to come on and talk about the draft.
Yeah, there is a lot that happened. So we're going to go through each guy one by one. So let's start with Travis Hunter. We've obviously been talking about it. It's been the talk of the league, honestly, too, which is especially funny because the Titans did have the first overall pick and went with Cam Ward, and no one's been talking about that for the past week. But everyone, both nationally and locally, is talking about Travis Hunter being a Jaguar, the fact that General Manager James Gladstone moved up from the 5th overall pick to the 2nd overall pick to secure the unicorn of the draft. And so before we get to your thoughts specifically on Travis Hunter and his fit in Jacksonville, just what are your thoughts on the trade, and especially on the night of the trade? Were you surprised? Did you think that it was fair? Did you think it was understandable for both sides? What were your thoughts on that first?
So on the trade, initially I was like, man, that's a lot of picks. But then I was like, don't care. I would do that trade every single time if it were presented to me again, because this is an opportunity to grab a once-in-a-lifetime kind of player. And I think the quote that really gives it away when we talk about kind of reading the tea leaves leading up to the draft is James Gladstone and the Jaguars kind of telegraphed this move. They said they were looking for ceiling raisers. They wanted to be bold going into this draft. So I think that doing all of that and hearing them say all of that is very much leading up to Travis Hunter. I would do that trade every single time if it were up to me. And then the fact that they are actually able to get it done, I was actually kind of stunned that it got done because, Andrew Berry was calling Travis Hunter Shohei Ohtani. So I'm glad the Jaguars got it done.
Hey, JP, sorry about that. My internet was wonky. That's my bad. I think for me, at least, you had just started talking about the Travis Hunter trade when I went out. So sorry for that, everyone.
Okay, no problem. So I was saying that I would do that trade 100 times out of 100. I think when you read what James Gladstone was talking about in the offseason about raising the ceiling and wanting to be bold, they were kind of telegraphing this trade all along. And I think it's pivotal for a first-year GM, a first-year coach to kind of back up what they were talking about. They were the entire lead up to the draft was about the Jaguars were going to do something bold. And the fact they actually went out and did it, but it's the process that really has me excited because they were looking for ceiling raisers. They were looking for explosiveness on offense. And I think going out and adding one of the true ceiling raisers, true franchise face of the franchise caliber players in Travis Hunter is immediately one of the best moves I think the Jaguars have made in the last few years, because you don't get a chance at a guy like Travis Hunter every year. This is a once in a lifetime opportunity, and the fact they were able to get it done is really impressive for a first year regime.
Absolutely. I think when you just look at kind of the results of the trade, especially on the night of, before we know how the teams are going to be using their draft capital, because I feel like that can kind of create some bias once you do kind of pin some names to the picks. But on Thursday night, when the trade initially happened, it seemed fair for both sides, I think, and understandable for both sides. But then especially when you go into the process, even for both sides, for Cleveland and Jacksonville, but especially Jacksonville, considering it's a new regime that clearly wanted to make a statement to not just the team and the city and everyone in Jacksonville, but also to people outside Jacksonville and to the rest of the league, saying like this isn't just the same old Jaguars. And so it's actually kind of funny still seeing like that being said about the Jaguars. Like Shio Kapadia for The Ringer, who I love. He's a great NFL analyst, but he wrote like a recap article for The Ringer that was like, I don't know if it's going to work out Travis Hunter in Jacksonville because it's the Jags, but it's like, that's like the whole point. Like, it's not like the same old Jags anymore. This is a new regime that's like making a statement that's not the same old Jags. And so certainly it'd be a lot of fun to see whether it works out for them. Specifically for Travis Hunter, it seems like the Jaguars are going to be trying him out at pretty much full-time receiver and like working him in on the defensive side of the ball, as opposed to making him pretty much a full-time corner and just a little bit of offense. And so do you think that's the right way to go about it? Is that what you would have done? Do you have like obviously I think everyone should have some concerns about the whether Travis Hunter really can play both sides at the NFL level, but like how high is a concern for you? And is it mostly like his frame or mostly just like the speed of the NFL game or what?
So initially I was in the camp of Travis Hunter should be full-time corner and then rotate in at receiver every like 10 to 15 like plays or something. Yeah. But going back and watching him play, I'm just like, if he says he wants to play both, I would be dumb to not let him try, because he was able to do both at the college level where the game is much faster. There's a lot more tempo, a lot less huddling. And I think the NFL kind of being slowed down in the tempo and the pace of the game actually helps Travis Hunter in this ability to play both ways. I don't mind them starting him off at receiver, because I think it also is telegraphing their free agency moves. You go out and add Jordan Lewis and you move Jarian Jones outside because you can rotate in Travis Hunter whenever you need him. So I think it's going to be difficult, because if you're rotating a guy in at corner, you can really only run like a few things. Like you're not telling him to go out there and like play like quarters coverage, like after not really being in the defensive meetings. But I think what Colorado did for Travis Hunter was they would have him in the defensive meetings throughout the season, and then they'd rotate him in and tell him what route to run. But the fact the Jaguars are doing it the other way, I'm very intrigued by what it looks like defensively and how long they're going to let him like go without actually like learning the entire defensive playbook. But if there's anybody that I think can have the capacity to learn both playbooks to a point to be a starter caliber player, it's Travis Hunter.
Yeah. So who do you think, to just wrap up the Travis Hunter talk before we move on to the rest of Jacksonville's 8 draft picks, who would you say is the biggest winner of Travis Hunter coming to Jacksonville? Is it Travis Hunter himself? Is it Jacksonville himself or Jacksonville itself? Is it James Gladstone, Trevor Lawrence? I think Tyson Campbell is a really sneaky winner of the Travis Hunter addition, because it's not just going to be a one-man show in the secondary anymore for Tyson. So just if you had to pick one, who's the biggest winner from the Travis Hunter trade and pick?
It's hard to go with anybody but James Gladstone.
Yeah.
Because the fact that he was able to orchestrate all this, I mean, a lot was made about him being 34 years old, youngest GM in the NFL by a wide margin. But the fact that they were able to get it done, they were able to back up the things that they said about wanting touchdowns, wanting explosiveness, wanting to create, and wanting to, I think Gladstone said it at the press conference with Travis Hunter, they want to push the boundaries of what can happen in the NFL. And the fact that he said that, I was ready to run through a brick wall. I was ready to go see if it actually would work. But the fact that you can see the process for what the Jaguars want to do and want to be really has me excited, because you don't really get that a lot from GMs. So I'm a big fan of James Gladstone being the biggest winner here. I think sneaky winner is Brian Thomas Jr., because you can't double Brian Thomas Jr. with Travis Hunter on the field. I think De'Ami Brown being able to be sort of that downfield explosive guy. You have all these targets, all these options on the outside. It's going to be really fun to see how Liam Cohen draws it up for both those guys.
Yeah, I think that like a lot of people are saying like, okay, it's time for like Trevor Lawrence to put up or shut up. Like he's got such an amazing cast that like he needs to perform and like really lead this team to the playoffs consistently, and not just once over a 4 or 5 year span. And like that is true, but I also think like that's the same regard for Liam Cohen, even if it is like his first time as a head coach and he's only been like calling plays even in the NFL for a handful of years. Like you got Travis Hunter, you got Trevor Lawrence, you got Brian Thomas. Like it's like maybe not time to put up or shut up for Liam Cohen in the fact that like again he is pretty new to the gig, but like he's got a lot to work with in the same way that Trevor Lawrence has to work with. And so I mean certainly you and I and the rest of Jacksonville are expecting big things for the offense and the defense with Travis Hunter impacting that. But to move on, pick 88 after the Jaguars trade their 36th overall pick as part of the Travis Hunter deal. Their next pick was 88th overall. In the third round, they went with Tulane cornerback, defensive back, I should say, Caleb Ransaw. What was your immediate reaction to this pick? Like, were you a little bit surprised? Because I think that Ransaw, according to consensus boards, was like maybe a little bit of a slight reach. But more than that, I think just because he only played 1 year at Tulane, was previously at Troy for 3 years. He was a little bit of like a smaller name, and so I think he just wasn't on a lot of guys' radars, including in Jacksonville. So did it like catch you by surprise at all, or were you like, oh, okay, this makes a lot of sense?
So Caleb Ransaw is one of the guys that just missed my top 100. I think he was just outside for my final big board. But when you look at what the Jaguars want to be, I was at first a little stunned because Xavier Watts was still on the board. And I thought Xavier Watts would kind of fit the defense of what they needed more. But they also prioritize versatility in the secondary. With having Jarian Jones being able to play inside and outside, Caleb Ransaw is going to start at safety. I think his best play is at safety. I think his tackling ability is really good from depth, and I think his eyes are much better coming downhill in coverage instead of playing like man coverage in the slot. But he qualifies for that versatility that they look for in their defensive backs. He's going to immediately be one of the best tacklers on the team. I think in the Senior Bowl, he was cracking people at the Senior Bowl. He was really going after in the tackling game. I think he was still trying to transition from nickel to safety because they kind of did a little bit of both with him at Tulane. He was basically like an overhang. So they play a lot of triple option teams, of course, in the American. And he was basically like a weak side linebacker. So I think having him at safety gives you another quality tackling option in case Eric Murray just doesn't work out. But that versatility is really going to help the defense in the long run.
Absolutely. Yeah, he seems like a really good long-term placement for maybe even Jordan Lewis as like the slot corner, but especially Eric Murray at safety, since the Jaguars did say after the draft that he would be not starting at safety, but starting out his career practicing and developing as a safety. And so you definitely identified two of like the biggest trends of the draft for the Jaguars, and that versatility is a big thing for them. Including the guy that we're about to get to, who can play across the offensive line, but like Caleb Ransaw can play across the secondary. And so even if he's going to start out at cornerback or at safety, he obviously has the ability to slide into the nickel. And I think he even has a little bit of like untapped potential, or at least like a underrated facet of his game is the ability to line up outside. So he's definitely got the versatility mark. And then also the Senior Bowl, which you mentioned. Every Jaguars draft pick not named Travis Hunter did appear at the Senior Bowl in 2025, which JP, I know you were there. What was that, like the third Senior Bowl that you've been to? Fourth? How many have you been going to?
That was my second Senior Bowl. So,
okay. Wow.
Yeah, I went in, I think it was the 2023 draft, and then I went for this one.
Well, I've only been to one, but I have like already kind of like planted in my head, like I'm going to try to make sure to get to next year's, especially considering how much the Jaguars obviously put stock into like seeing players at the Senior Bowl, seeing players like just like showing out their love for the game, basically. But like whether it's like by going all out and tackling drills, like it sounds like Ransaw did, or by doing what this next guy did, and like kind of, or I think Jack Kaiser is the one that like was literally playing like a bunch of multiple positions just to kind of help out like the coaching staff and like kind of like fill areas that need to be filled in terms of drills and stuff like that. But also it helps for him to showcase his versatility. And so to move on to this next player that I've been foreshadowing a little bit, Wyatt Milum was the 89th overall pick right after Caleb Ransaw, 88th overall. And so Milum was a 4-year offensive tackle at West Virginia. He's expected to be a guard at the next level, so he'll immediately compete with Ezra Cleveland for the starting left job role in Jacksonville. But what did you think of Wyatt Milum as a prospect, and what do you think of him as a fit in Jacksonville?
Yeah, I think he's going to be a guard in Jacksonville. 32 and 1/8 inch arms kind of locks him inside. But I think some of the things that stood out with Milum is the grip strength And then the ability on combos and double teams to displace guys, which I think is going to really help inside rather than outside. He's best in a gap scheme. I think he's able to get downhill and get to linebackers really well at the second level. But I kind of have a little bit of worries about how stiff he is in the lower body. But I think that's kind of mitigated by having your tackle and your center next to you. So you're kind of limited to a phone booth. Right. You're not really having to move that insane at guard. So I'm excited to see what happens there. But I do think he'll push Ezra Cleveland for the starting guard job because they just need some physicality up front. I think that's been something the Jaguars have really lacked. Even with Cam Robinson on the team, they lacked physicality. They lacked an edge. And I think Wyatt Milum, I think he's a former wrestler. I think he brings that physicality, especially on the inside. So I wouldn't be surprised if he pushes Cleveland for the starting job. But if he doesn't get it, he's going to be the swing, like the sixth offensive lineman.
Totally. Do you remember anything specific from Milum at the Senior Bowl? Because I feel like I've actually tried to go back, and I heard that he was like technically not like maybe one of the worst performers, at least on the offensive line. So I'm like wondering if his like tape wasn't very good, especially in like one-on-one drills at the Senior Bowl. Like maybe there was something else off to the side where he was able to show off like his football characteristics. But did anything stand out to you, good or bad, from Milum that week?
I think he struggled against length at the Senior Bowl. I think he was struggling at guard because this was his first time playing guard at any level of the sport. So he struggled there. But again, it's the grip strength in the run game where he really stood out. He didn't stand out very much in pass protection because he was playing a new position. But I think in the run game, he showed out.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Let's move on to the Jaguars' next pick, which was in the 4th round. They were thinking really hard about taking R.J. Harvey earlier in the draft, apparently, according to The Athletic's Mike Silver. He wrote a really great article, 2 really good articles, actually, like one kind of detailing all the events going inside the Jaguars' draft room on Thursday night during their first-round trade-up for Travis Hunter. And then he had another one that was released yesterday on Tuesday going over kind of the rest of the draft from the Jaguars' perspective in the locker room. Or in the war room, excuse me. So one of the takeaways that we were able to have as readers is that the Jaguars did really, really like R.J. Harvey. It seemed like Liam Cohen especially was a big fan of his game. But Harvey was picked towards the end of the 2nd round by the Broncos into the Jaguars. Specifically, James Gladstone preached patience and waited around until the early 4th round, pick 104 to take Virginia Tech running back Bijchel Tutin. What do you think of Tutin? What do you think about his fit in Jacksonville, specifically in Liam Cohen's offense?
So first, it's good to know that the Jaguars read my mock drafts where I had them picking RJ Harvey every time since the Senior Bowl because I thought that would be a perfect fit. But I think Bijchel Tutin makes a lot of sense for this team in terms of what he brings to an offense. He's going to be explosive. And I think that's the first thing that you look at when you watch Bijchel Tutin play. He was one of the most explosive running backs at the combine, if not the most explosive. Legit former track star, 4.32 40-yard dash, 41-inch vertical. You see the explosiveness when he has the ball in his hands. I think he's a little bit better on outside zone tracks where you get him in the ball in space and he puts his foot in the ground and you can see the easy acceleration. I think he also is actually not that bad of a pass protector despite being 5'8". I think he's able to get under guys. He's able to that's where he actually surprised me at the Senior Bowl was in his pass protection because he was one of the smallest backs there, but it was still not losing handily to a lot of guys. And I think he showed off some of his pass receiving chops. The biggest thing is the fumbles. And the fumbles will be a little bit of an issue, but getting him into an NFL locker room, getting him into an NFL workout program, getting him around other NFL players maybe should help a little bit of the fumbleitis. But I think he's going to immediately challenge for reps and playing time because of how explosive he is.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, hopefully he won't take any ball security lessons from Tank Bigsby, but certainly the Jaguars' running back room is pretty deep right now. It does feel like they're certainly preparing for a future without Travis Etienne when you consider that they spent not just a 4th rounder here on Tutin, but also a 7th rounder on a running back that we'll get to in a second. But also it seems like the general kind of consensus or understanding is that the Jaguars would have taken Ashton Jeanty if they had stayed at the 5th overall pick. And so with both of those some different scenarios in mind, clearly the Jaguars were looking to have some kind of upgrade to their running back room. And so it'll be interesting to see for sure how quickly Tutin is able to see the field and make an effect. But it is certainly nice, I think, that even if he doesn't have like a Pro Bowl running back in front of him, that he does have some guys that can carry the ball, and like he doesn't have to have too much on his plate quickly. I think it will be a good thing for him for sure. Moving on, 3 picks later at 107th overall, the Jaguars went with linebacker Jack Kaiser out of Notre Dame. Seems like a really, really good fit on and off the field for the Jaguars, but this was probably their biggest reach and according to consensus boards. So did you think it was a reach? Do you think it was a reach, but you don't mind it? And more importantly, what do you think about Kaiser as a prospect?
So I thought it was a little bit of a reach, but I don't mind it, especially given the amount of linebackers on the board. I think Paul was available, Kane Medrano, but those were really the only two. And then Danny Stutzman, like those were the only few linebackers where I'm like, I could see them being the pick there. But if you think about Danny Stutzman, he's a little bit of a clone of Devin Lloyd in terms of how he wins and where he wins. And I think Paul doesn't have the athleticism that they look for at the second level. But with a guy like Jack Kaiser, the thing that stands out immediately is this dude loves football. Like he showed up to the Senior Bowl like 10 days after the national championship game. He was one of 2 Notre Dame players to play at the Senior Bowl. They were the only 2 players to 3, because Riley Leonard, RJ Oben, and Jack Kaiser were all at the Senior Bowl 10 days after playing in the national championship game against Ohio State. But the thing that stands out is just his fluidity in coverage. And I think you're kind of not expecting it for a linebacker from Notre Dame to be a fluid coverage guy, but he's somebody you can drop in there. He's able to match coverages. He's able to match up against tight ends and running backs, kind of wall them off. He had a really good week in coverage against the Senior Bowl running backs. I think Daniel Jeremiah said it on day 3 when they picked him. It's very similar to Drew Tranquil, who was also a Notre Dame linebacker, rangy in coverage, but he's incredibly instinctive. He was able to be around a ball a lot. So I think he kind of fits the intangibly rich mantra that they have been talking about a lot. And that's the first thing I said when they drafted him. Like, if you look up intangibly rich, it is Jack Kaiser. And I think he could actually push for early reps in that linebacker room because of his range in coverage. And that's something that not a lot of linebackers on the team have outside of Foye Oluokun, who might be losing a step due to age. So I wouldn't be surprised if he plays on passing downs, designated passing downs.
Yeah, I think I'm with you where, like, even if it was technically a reach, I'm fine with it, partly because, like, even if there was a handful of linebackers that were available, I feel like there was a run of linebackers after the Kaiser pick. And so if the Jaguars wanted linebacker in that range, like, they had to get the guy they wanted at 107 overall. Certainly agree with you where, like, Kaiser seems like the epitome of intangibly rich and everything that James Gladstone and the Jaguars brass has been talking about all offseason in terms of not just that type of player, but the type of person they want to bring in to elevate the ecosystem around them. And yeah, I think that certainly it feels a lot like a James Gladstone pick for all those reasons, but it also feels a little bit like a Anthony Campanile pick, because I think that when you're looking at the Packers defense from last year, where Campanile is from, Campanile is a linebackers coach himself. He was an assistant linebackers coach and linebackers coach in the NFL for several seasons, but also linebackers is pretty important for the scheme that he wants to carry out. And I think that Todd Halfley, Green Bay's current defensive coordinator, who Campanile coached under last year, said, like, at some point this offseason about how important linebackers are to their scheme and how, like, they're going to be hunting up more linebackers in the offseason, because it's not just important to get like 1 or 2 good ones, but to have depth as well. And so for a ton of reasons, Jack Kaiser makes a lot of sense in Jacksonville. The 6th round, I believe Jaylen Mloud was the next pick for the Jaguars at 194th overall. I had not heard of him, but it seemed like it might have been like one of the best picks for the Jaguars, considering, according to, again, the Athletics' Mike Silver, James Gladstone seemed to be considering taking this guy with one of their 2 4th-round picks, but instead he slides and gets taken by Jacksonville at 194th overall. So Auburn defensive end / linebacker Jaylen Mloud, what are your thoughts on him as a prospect and his fit in Jacksonville?
I think if you look at what Anthony Campanile and what the Packers defense did with Edger and Cooper as basically their 5th pass rusher, I think that's kind of what you look for early with Jaylen Mloud's career. Like you said, former defensive end, former edge. He played edge at Auburn and at App State. Mm-hmm. And he kind of played linebacker in the Senior Bowl, but he did a lot of both. And so I think where you have a lot of similarity is actually very funny, because the Packers drafted Colin Oliver, who was kind of the same thing as Jaylen Mloud, but I think Jaylen Mloud just has a little more burst to him. So I think you're going to see him a lot as sort of the designated pass rusher of the linebacker group. If he's in, he's probably going to blitz, because I don't think he has the capabilities in coverage, because he's an edge. He's an edge defender who's a little too small to be on the edge full time. So I wonder how you get creative and get him design looks as maybe like a spinner, where you have him just line up right in front of the guard and see what you can do there. But he should bring a different element to the Jaguars defensive line, to the pass rush, because Trayvon Walker, Josh Allen, they all win converting speed to power. Jaylen Mloud is going to convert speed to more speed. So I think he's going to be able to play on third downs, especially obvious passing downs. If you want to get really fancy with how you line up your coverage and how you line up your personnel, he might be able to play early, but this is a developmental. We'll see what we got as we play this season out.
Now, if you had to guess, like, why do you think James Gladstone likes this guy so much? Because I'm sure, like, the Jaguars weren't the only one that had him ranked higher on their board than, like, wherever he was on consensus boards. But, like, if there's one thing, like, what do you think it is that, like, made him stand out to James Gladstone? One other draft trend that, like, we haven't specifically mentioned, but kind of sort of mentioned, was the fact that the Jaguars really like guys who transfer up from small schools and continue to produce at bigger schools and better programs. So Mloud is certainly an example of that. But is there anything that sticks out to you about his profile that you think really stuck out to James Gladstone?
I think, again, it's the versatility. If you think about all the picks post Travis Hunter, who was the most versatile player in the draft, you have guys who can play multiple positions. You think about Ransaw, who can play nickel or safety. Milum is kind of your guard, tackle, like swing player. And I think Jaylen Mloud, what stands out is he can rush the passer, but he's an off-ball linebacker, so you're able to kind of move him around off the ball and see if you can create different looks for him. And I think that's what really stands out. I mean, outside of like Jack Kaiser, who is sort of your traditional like Mike linebacker.
Right.
But the thing that stands out is the positional versatility. It's the ability to move these guys around and see if you can just get your best 11 on the field. And I think that's going to be really important for the Jaguars, who I think the Jaguars were talented last year, but were very poorly coached. But the fact they're leaning in on the versatility makes me think we're going to get these guys into NFL coaching, and we're just going to throw our best 11 out in the field and see what happens.
Yeah, absolutely. It certainly sounds like the plan. And like, obviously James Gladstone values versatility, but so does Liam Cohen and Anthony Campanile. Like, it's all kind of a collaborative effort in terms of the vision that they have, where like Liam Cohen talks a lot about what's the phrase that they use in like the McVay coaching scheme? The illusion of complexity, where it's like they've got like a couple of like or more than a couple, but like kind of like some relatively basic play concepts that seem a lot less basic. They seem a lot more nuanced and more complex because they're able to get to those play concepts in a variety of different ways and different formations and stuff like that. So you can almost think about it in the same way on the defensive side of the ball, I think, for Campanile's defense, especially if it's like any kind of a fraction of like what Brian Flores is doing up in Minnesota for the Vikings, and the amount of creativity and versatility that he has in Minnesota. It might be something a little bit similar down here in Jacksonville, where it's like they have a few relatively basic play types, but because of all the different ways they're able to get to that play type, it makes it really hard for the opposition. And so it will certainly be exciting to see how that versatility translates on the field in the fall. But to move on, pick 200th overall was Navy safety Ryan Lane III. It seems like he's going to be like a special teams ace and maybe can give you a little bit of depth in the secondary. But do you think there's more untapped potential as a safety, or do you think Jags fans should just be looking forward to him sprinting down the field in gunner situations?
I think he's a little too athletically limited to be anything more than kind of your special teams ace, but I wouldn't be surprised if he finds his way onto the defense because he just finds his way around the ball. Like he's I think he had like the most like turnovers forced in college football last year or over the course of the last 2 years, because he just finds his way around the ball. He's instinctive. He's immediately going to come in and help your special teams, but I worry a little bit about the athletically limited, his limitations in space, his limitations in coverage. But if you give him one assignment to go downhill and go hit a guy on special teams, I think he's going to be really good at that.
Makes sense. All right, let's go through these last two picks a little bit quickly. Pick 221 overall was USC center Jonah Mheim. What are thoughts on him before the process and then after the facts with the pick, his fit in Jacksonville?
I think Jonah Mheim has a chance to be a really good center in the NFL. I think he played tackle at USC, which was like, hey, man, I don't know what you were doing all the way out there. He's also a guy who has really short arms. I think he has shorter arms than Milum, but I'm going to check that real quick. Yeah, he has 30 1/8 inch arms. That's not surviving at tackle or guard, but I think his play strength concerns were also the biggest thing. Like, he just doesn't have a lot of anchor in his legs. Right. But I think that helps him at center because it limits that, and it also showcases his movement skills, which I think are a little better. I think he's got the chance, depending on what happens with Hainsey in the future. I think he could be your potential starting center. But the thing that stands out to me for this pick is Luke Fortner is out of here. That is the one thing that I said as soon as they picked Mheim. I'm like, all right, Luke Fortner's done here. So I think that makes it a plus. But I'm excited to see what happens with Mheim in his career in Jacksonville.
Yeah, it definitely seems like he's the kind of guy that like has a lot of pluses on the mental side of the game and a lot of negatives on the physical side of the game. And so it'd be interesting to see like how that weighs out, especially at the NFL level. But since the Jaguars still do have Luke Fortner on the roster, but they especially signed Robert Hainsey from the Buccaneers in free agency to at least a 2-year deal. I'm pretty sure it's a 3-year deal though. And so Hainsey figures to start for the next 1 to 2 to maybe even 3+ years. Yeah, Mheim, I think, definitely makes sense as a kind of developmental interior offensive line, potentially swing guy. Last pick in the draft, the 9th pick for the Jaguars in 2025 at 236 overall, off the top of my head, was Syracuse running back Laquent Allen Jr. This was honestly might have been my favorite pick of the draft for the Jaguars outside of Travis Hunter in terms of the value, in terms of the role that I expect him to play in Liam Cohen's offense. But what say you? What do you think about Laquent Allen?
The thing that stands out with Laquent Allen is he is so willing to block. I think he's a monster as a pass protector. They threw him the ball a lot at Syracuse because at Syracuse they just threw the ball all over the field. But he's a bona fide receiver. You can throw him the ball and do a lot of designer stuff. You can have him out there as a pass protector, and he can kind of be a little. I think he's better between the tackles than truly like running outside on outside zone tracks. So it kind of helps with what the Jaguars are doing with their gap scheme runs. But I think he's immediately going to be a factor on third downs because he's going to block his ass off and he's going to be a really, really good receiver out the backfield. So I think with a running back room of Tank Bigsby, Travis Etienne, whatever happens with Etienne, Bijchel Tutin, and Laquent Allen, you have a lot of different flavors in the running back room, which is very similar to what they did in Tampa with what Liam Cohen had last year. So I'm curious to see how he works into the rotation, but I think he's a really, really damn good player.
Yeah, his third down value will hopefully be very high because as both a pass protector, as a receiver, not just out of the backfield, but even like lining up in the slot, maybe even out wide. He definitely showed that ability in college. And I think Liam Cohen specifically said like how definitely excited he is to use him in the screen game, which the Bucs ran a ton of screens last year, probably more than anyone in the league, but also even like as a receiver lined up in various alignments on offense. And so that's definitely a very fun scheme fit and a very fun 7th round pick. And it seems like a good and smart 7th round pick too, considering like how deep the running back class was. And you could really find guys who can truly contribute even when the draft is pretty much wrapped up. And so to wrap up this show, the Jags also signed 20 undrafted free agents. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on any of those names or any just final thoughts as we wrap up today's show.
So I wouldn't be surprised if Ethan Downs ends up making the final 53. My friend AJ Schulte covers Oklahoma. He told me about Downs early into the season. Really rugged run defender. I think that's something that also stands out. He's going to be an edge in the NFL. He's got a little more athleticism than I thought he would. I think he showed a lot of athleticism at the Combine and at the Shrine Bowl. So I'm excited to see where he goes. I'm excited to see what happens to him in Jacksonville because I think he can be another guy that you rotate in on early downs. Not to say they're rotating him in like Ryan Nielsen, but you can rotate him in and he can play the run and kind of give Trayvon Walker, Josh Hines Allen some breathers so they can be fully at their best on third down.
Yeah, and especially third down late in the game. So that makes a lot of sense. JP, certainly you've had so much draft content at SB Nation so far, so would certainly recommend going to check out everything that JP wrote, even during the draft, even before the draft. You can certainly learn a lot. But JP, is there anything specific that you've just published or about to publish that you want to plug?
So we published yesterday our final NFL draft class grades. Make sure to go look at that. I think we ended up giving the Jaguars an A. I'm pretty sure. I'd have to go back and check.
I remember seeing it, but it was definitely in the A category.
Yeah, I think we ended up giving the Jaguars an A-. We gave them an A-. I think it was a really good draft overall, especially for getting Travis Hunter.
Yeah.
But if you want to go look at the grades, go look at what specifically we thought of their draft class. I have a lot of work that I did on SB Nation's TikTok. Make sure to follow there. But outside of that, we're entering the off season. We're entering the quiet season. So make sure to follow, see what I'm doing.
Yeah. Well, go hibernate for a little bit, JP. I know you've been cranking out all the work, but thank you so much for joining the show. Thank you for being our first repeat guest. Hopefully we'll have you back again, maybe even before the season starts. But that was a lot of fun. Thanks as always for joining, man.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
All right. Thank you to all of our watchers, listeners, and commenters. Apologies again for the technical difficulties to start the show, but I will be back at 9:04 a.m. Eastern tomorrow with Mia O'Brien to continue breaking down Jacksonville's 2025 NFL draft class. Make sure to check out JP's work over at SB Nation and SB Nation's TikTok. Adios, guys. See you tomorrow.